house was a smoldering ruin. The Carters, like the Wilsons, escaped unharmed but lost nearly everything. The fire chief mentioned a possible gas leak, but the investigation was ongoing. Neighbors gathered again, their whispers growing darker. 2 fires in the same neighborhood, both targeting HOA board members? It was too much of a coincidence. Sarah overheard snippets of conversation at the community mailbox. Some blamed shoddy construction, others speculated about arson. One neighbor, an older man named George, muttered something about bad karma for the HOA's heavy-handedness. Sarah didn't join in. She went home, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat on her porch, staring at the lake she could no longer touch. She didn't feel joy at the Carters' loss, but she didn't feel sorry either. The HOA had made her life miserable, and now they were paying a price. It wasn't her doing, but it felt like the universe was balancing the scales. The neighborhood grew tense. People stopped chatting as freely, and the HOA meetings became sparsely attended. Karen and Tom Mitchell doubled down, sending out emails about community safety and urging everyone to check their smoke detectors. They hired a private security company to patrol at night, claiming it was for everyone's protection. Sarah found it ironic. The HOA was more concerned with catching rule breakers than addressing the fires. She kept her head down, tending her garden and avoiding the lake path, though the temptation to defy the rules grew stronger. Then, in early spring, the 3rd fire hit. This time, it was Karen and Tom's house. It was a Saturday night, and Sarah was reading in bed when she heard the now-familiar sirens. She didn't even need to look outside to know what was happening. By the time she stepped onto her porch, the Mitchells' McMansion was an inferno. The flames were relentless, consuming the gaudy chandelier in the foyer, the custom kitchen, the 3-car garage. Karen and Tom stood in the street, clutching each other, their faces illuminated by the glow. The fire department fought for hours, but the house was a total loss. This time, the whispers turned to accusations. 3 fires, all targeting HOA board members, couldn't be a coincidence. The police got involved, questioning neighbors and reviewing security footage. Sarah heard through the grapevine that Karen had pointed fingers at her, claiming Sarah had a vendetta over the lake access issue. The accusation stung, but Sarah wasn't surprised. Karen had always seen her as an outsider, someone who didn't fit into Willowbank's polished mold. When a detective knocked on Sarah's door, she answered calmly, explaining that she'd been home alone during each fire, working or sleeping. She had no motive, no evidence against her, and the detective left after a brief conversation. Still, the suspicion lingered in the neighborhood's sidelong glances. Sarah didn't help her case by staying so private. She rarely socialized, and her quiet demeanor made people uneasy. Some neighbors started avoiding her, crossing the street when they saw her walking her dog. Others, like George, seemed to sympathize. He stopped by one day while Sarah was weeding her garden and said, "You know, folks are saying you're bad luck. I don't buy it. This HOA's been asking for trouble for years." Sarah thanked him but didn't engage. She didn't need to fuel the rumors. The fires stopped after the Mitchells' house, but the damage was done. Willowbank was a shadow of its former self. Property values plummeted, and for sale signs sprouted like weeds. The HOA board, now leaderless, dissolved into chaos. Karen and Tom moved away, as did the Wilsons and Carters. Sarah stayed, partly out of stubbornness, partly because she couldn't afford to leave. The lake was still there, shimmering beyond her backyard, but the path remained off-limits. She didn't dare use it, not with the neighborhood's eyes on her. Months passed, and the investigations closed without answers. The official reports cited electrical faults, gas leaks, and undetermined causes. No evidence of arson was found, but the lack of closure only fueled speculation. Sarah heard every theory: a disgruntled contractor, a vengeful ex-spouse, even kids playing with matches. She didn't care. The HOA was gone, and with it, the suffocating rules. She started walking to the lake again, not caring who saw. Nobody stopped her. One evening, as Sarah sat by the water, watching the sunset, George approached. He was one of the few neighbors who still spoke to her. "You know," he said, sitting on a nearby rock, "folks still talk about you. They think you had something to do with those fires." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Let them talk," she said. I didn't do anything. George nodded, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. Funny thing, he added. Those houses burned, and you got your lake back. Almost like someone was looking out for you. Sarah didn't respond. She turned back to the lake, its surface calm and unbroken. The neighborhood was quieter now, the HOA's grip broken. She didn't know what had caused the fires, and she didn't want to. All she knew was that she could breathe again, sitting by the water that had always been her refuge. The rumors could swirl, the neighbors could whisper, but Sarah had her lake, and that was enough. When the HOA barred Sarah from the lake she'd cherished for years, they thought they'd won a petty neighborhood power play. But when flames began devouring their homes one by one, whispers spread like wildfire. Was this just a cruel twist of fate, or had Sarah's quiet fury sparked something far more dangerous? Sarah had lived in the quiet lakeside community of Willowbank for nearly a decade. Her small, single-story home sat at the edge of the neighborhood, its backyard sloping gently toward Lake Serene, a shimmering expanse of water that had been her sanctuary. She'd moved there after a messy divorce, seeking peace and a fresh start. The lake was her escape. Mornings spent kayaking, afternoons reading on the shore, and evenings watching the sunset ripple across the water. It wasn't just a body of water, it was her lifeline. But the Willowbank Homeowners Association had other plans. The trouble began 2 years ago when the HOA, led by a clique of self-important neighbors, decided to tighten their grip on the community. They called it preserving property values, but to Sarah, it felt like a power grab. The HOA president, Karen Mitchell, was a fastidious woman in her late 50s who wore her authority like a crown. Her husband, Tom, was the treasurer, and their close friends, the Wilsons and the Carters, filled out the board. Together, they ruled Willowbank with an iron fist, issuing fines for unapproved mailboxes, scrutinizing lawn lengths, and sending sternly worded letters about minor infractions. Sarah had always kept her head down, paying her dues and following the rules, but she couldn't escape their scrutiny forever. It started with a letter slipped into her mailbox one crisp October morning. The HOA had decided to restrict lake access to a small, gated dock on the far side of the neighborhood, claiming it was to protect the shoreline from overuse. Sarah's property, which had direct access to the lake via a narrow path, was now off-limits. The letter cited vague environmental concerns and referenced a bylaw Sarah had never heard of. She was stunned. Her backyard path, the one she'd walked every day for years, was now deemed unauthorized. The HOA demanded she cease using it immediately or face fines of $500 per violation. Sarah wasn't one to pick fights, but this felt personal. She'd never caused trouble, never complained about the noisy barbecues at the Wilsons or the Carters' dog barking at all hours. Yet here she was, targeted for something as simple as walking to the lake. She tried reasoning with Karen at the next HOA meeting, held in the community center's stuffy conference room. Sarah stood up, her voice steady but firm, and explained how the lake was her only real joy in Willowbank. She asked why her access was being singled out when others still used the gated dock freely. Karen's response was curt. "The rules apply to everyone, Sarah. Your path is damaging the ecosystem. We've had complaints." When Sarah pressed for details, who had complained, what damage had been done, Karen waved her off, saying the board's decision was final. The Wilsons and Carters nodded in agreement, their faces blank but smug. Sarah left the meeting feeling humiliated and powerless. She wasn't a lawyer, and she didn't have the money to hire one. The HOA knew that, and they counted on it. Over the next few months, Sarah complied, avoiding her beloved path to the lake. She tried using the gated dock, but it was a half-mile walk, and the keycard system was a hassle. Worse, the dock was often crowded with Karen's friends, who'd give her sidelong glances as she approached. It wasn't the same. Her mornings felt empty without her kayak, her evenings lonely without the lake's calm. She began to resent her neighbors, not just the HOA board but the others who went along with it, too spineless to question the rules. She kept to herself, retreating into her work as a freelance graphic designer, but the bitterness grew. Then came the first fire. It was a dry August night, the kind where the air felt like it could crackle. Sarah was working late when she heard sirens. She stepped outside to see red and orange lights flickering across the street. The Wilsons' house, a sprawling 2-story with a perfectly manicured lawn, was ablaze. Flames licked up the siding, devouring the second floor. Firefighters swarmed the property, But by the time they got the blaze under control, the house was gutted. The Wilsons stood in their driveway, shell-shocked, as neighbors gathered to gawk. Nobody knew how it started. An electrical fault, the fire chief said, possibly from faulty wiring in the attic. Sarah watched from her porch, her heart pounding. She felt a pang of sympathy, but it was fleeting. The Wilsons had been part of the HOA's campaign against her. She didn't wish them harm, but she couldn't muster much pity either. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip for weeks. The Wilsons moved into a rental while their insurance company investigated. Some neighbors whispered about bad luck, others about negligence. Sarah kept her thoughts to herself, but she couldn't help noticing the timing. Just months after the HOA had tightened its grip, one of its key members lost everything. It felt like a strange kind of justice, though she'd never admit it out loud. Life went on, and Sarah tried to move past her anger. She started gardening, hoping it would fill the void left by the lake. She planted roses and lavender, coaxing life from the soil. It helped, but it wasn't the same. The HOA continued its reign, issuing new rules about fence heights and exterior paint colors. Sarah ignored them as best she could, focusing on her work and her garden. But the resentment lingered, a quiet ember in her chest. 6 months later, the second fire struck. This time, it was the Carters' house. It happened in the middle of the night, and Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the wail of sirens. From her window, she saw flames engulfing the Carters' colonial-style home, the one with the pretentious columns out front. The fire was ferocious, spreading faster than the first. By morning, the